להקליט. Okay, good morning. The Shiur will be dedicated לרפואת נחמה, צ'רנה בת פייגל, לרפואה שלמה בתוך שאר חולי עמו ישראל. Let's start with Parshat Bamidbar, Parshat Matot Masei attached together, and that's a sum up of Sefer Bamidbar, but not only Sefer Bamidbar. I would like to use what the Maharal says at length in his book on the Torah, Tiferet Israel. The Maharal, based on the Gemara in the end of Masechet Megillah, the Gemara says something like to differentiate between the klalot of Parashat Bechukotai and the klalot of Parashat Ki Tavo. We know that twice we have long klalot in the Torah, and then the Gemara says that klalot שבתורת כהנים, meaning to say Bechukotai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said them. klalot שבמשנה תורה, meaning to say Ki Tavo, Moshe מפי עצמו אמרם. Moshe said it by himself. So we know it's impossible because one of the ikorim of the Rambam writes it in many places, is that Moshe cannot take even a word from himself. Anything in the Torah is by himself. We spoke on Shabbat about the last 8 psukim in the Torah. There is a machloket in Mababato whether it's Yoshua or Moshe Rabbeinu, but it must be that it is Moshe or by Moshe. Nothing is by himself. That's one of the basic beliefs of the Torah, because otherwise we won't believe in its heavenly source. So how is it possible, asks the Maharal in Tiferet Israel, that Moshe mipi atzmo amro? And then the Maharal makes a big chalukah, a big differentiation between the 4 former Sforim and the last one, the 5th one. And the Maharal says that based on, he says it many places in Tiferet Israel, he says that the Brit, the covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, like any covenant, is based on 2 or 3 sections. The first one depends on the giver, the Noten Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The second one depends on the Mekabel, Am Yisrael. And sometimes he says there are, the 3 is between them. He very nicely explains, there is a midrash that when Am Yisrael were sitting in Chet HaEgel, so at the same time, the luchot were 6 tfochim width. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was holding 2 tfochim, Moshe Rabbeinu was holding 2 tfochim, and 2 tefachim were between Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Moshe didn't get it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't deliver it, and then Moshe could take it and grab it, and throw it later on. So Maharal wants to explain that here, in this midrash, we have mamash the 3/3. We have a third, 2 tefachim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah giver. We have 2 tefachim of Moshe Rabbeinu as a Torah Mekabel, and we have something in between. And in modern words, we would say that when you give a heavenly Torah, you have the heavenly perspection of the Torah. Okay, we know that it's heavenly, we don't understand it all, we have paraduma, but we must explain and understand the Torah to ourselves, because once you say the Torah is just in heavenly and too gavoa and too high, and we cannot understand it, and we cannot argue with it because we don't understand, so then we don't play, the Torah doesn't play on our court, okay, on our courtyard. We want the Torah to be a part of our lives, and therefore we have to understand it in our brain, in our kelim, and therefore it's very chashuv the Torah would be transformed to the mekabel, to the receiver, and that's therefore Moshe holds 2 tefachim of the Torah according to the Maharal, and sometimes that's what the Maharal says, you have a gray area. You have something that is in between the Kadosh Baruch Hu and ourselves. Sometimes the Kadosh Baruch Hu takes his part and overcome it, and sometimes we do it. And it's very chashuv that Torah won't be just black and white. It won't be very explicit, but it will have some parts of it that we can use our human interpretation, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes gives Chachmei Torah his wisdom, or sometimes he, on the contrary, he doesn't give them. He just sends a Novi to say, this has to be like this, and that's it. And therefore, back to the Maharal says that the same thing happens with Chamisha Chumshei Torah. The four former Chumashim belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from his point of view. And as you can see it, that how does it start? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So it starts with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How does it end? What's the last very pasuk of Parashat Masei? אלה התורות והמצוות, אלה החוקים והמשפטים אשר ציווה השם ביד משה לבני ישראל על ערבות מואב על ירדן יריחו, בערבות מואב על ירדן יריחו. Meaning to say that we stress out the koach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu started the world by creating it in Parashat Bereshit, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu ends the Torah in Parashat Masei by saying that, okay, now I finished everything, I've given Ma'amad Har Sinai, I've given also mitzvot בכניסה לארץ, and Am Yisrael can just enter Eretz Yisrael. That's the only thing that he has to do, and to fulfill everything I've given. So everything is based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. While Sefer Dvorim, as to the Maharal, is based on our receiving receivers, המקבלים. And therefore, the Gemara can say, Moshe מפי עצמו אמרו. חס ושלום that Moshe made any word of it, but Moshe said the same things, אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה, in the Mekabel's perspective, and therefore we have at Parashat Shoftim, for instance, all the Mosadot, all the institutions of Am Yisrael. We have the Shoifet, we have the Novi, we have the Kohanim, we have how to handle a war, Parashat Ki Titzeh and Parashat Shoftim. So we don't discuss it in the form of Sforim, not just because we're not close to Eretz Yisrael, as the Ramban says many times, that a lot of the mitzvot that appear in Sefer Dvarim is just because being close to getting into Eretz Yisrael. That's one issue. If you look at the Torah as 5 books, one long perspective. But if you look and divide it into 2 perspectives, so the 5th book belongs to us, and therefore we discuss it from our side, and then you can understand many things. Let's say, first of all, how does Sefer Dvorim starts? Not with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, but with Moshe. אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל. How does Sefer Dvorim end? As I said on Shabbat, it ends with just talking about Moshe. Nothing about the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? We talked about ולכל היד החזקה ולכל האותות והמופתים אשר עשה משה. כן? כל הדברים שמשה עשה, all the things that Moshe has done, and it's because of the Mekabel, because the perspective Choshuv is what Moshe did. And therefore, we have the differences, like let's say in Aseret HaDibrot, we have twice Shabbat, נכון? One time in Parshat Yitro, one time in Parashat Vayetchanan. One time belongs to the former 4 Sforim, one time belongs to the 5th Sefer. How does the Torah describe Shabbat? So in Parashat Vayetchanan, Yitro, the Torah describes it with the only reason why you have to keep Shabbat is because of Kadosh Baruch Hu. You imitatio dai, you imitate a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore you have to exempt out all the deeds of the week and to rest. like הקדוש ברוך הוא, כי 6 ימים ברא, עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא את השמיים ואת הארץ, ביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. And you have to imitate him, you have to do the same thing. That's because of heavenly Shabbat. And coming to Yitro, to Vaytchanan, you see a very different thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe, as we say, describes the Shabbat very differently. You don't have to rest because HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it, but because it's social. And every slave has to rest. And the Torah is the only religion by then that understands that a human being is not an animal, and he cannot work 7 days all over the week, and he has to rest. And that's a very social thing, and therefore you have a difference. You can see it in many places if you compare Parashat Mishpatim, Eved Ivri, that after 6 years he comes and wants to stay more. So he has Ritzia in his ear. And the same thing happens in Parashat, in the Torah, in Sefer Dvarim. And you have differences. If you look in Parashat Mishpatim, you see it's more from the a heavenly decision. Why? Because אוזן ששמעה בהר סיני כי לבני ישראל עבדים והלך וקנה עבד לעצמו, because of the person that heard in מעמד הר סיני that a human being cannot be a slave, and even though he made himself a slave forever, therefore we punish him by making something in his ear. Actually, in Sefer Dvarim, it's not the heavenly tfisa of the freedom of the human freedom, it's just the social tfisa of the human freedom. And if I decide to enslave myself, why do you care? It's my own problem. I am an adult and I sign it, and who can get into my decisions? And we can make many differences. So that's very basic. And now I want to say it with the end of Sefer Bamidbar. So the Sefer Bamidbar basically we spoke at length at Parashat Be'alotcha that this book encompasses 3 books. We have the book before Vayhi Ben Soar, we have the book after Vayhi Ben Soar, and we have the 85 letters of Vayhi Ben Soar as a separated, unique book. And we understood then that all the first book of Bamidbar is just the Aliyah, just uphill towards Eretz Israel. All the things after Sefer Vayhi Ben Soar is just the Yerida. All the Chataim, Vayam Kemitonanim, and the Meraglim, and the Korach, Ma'apilim, Shitim, whatever. We have many differences of mistakes and sins, and towards different people, or towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, towards Eretz Israel, towards Moshe Rabbeinu as a leader, Miriam, Korach, and towards everything. And now I want to say to see a global look on Sefer Bamidbar based on what I've said before in the name of the Maharal. We start the book by organizing the Machaneh, right? Am Yisrael went out of Egypt in Sefer Shmot. They have the Torat Kohanim with all the Korbanot in Sefer Vayikra, mamash milemala. And at Sefer Bamidbar, they organize everything. They organize a Machaneh, Ish al Machaneh, or Ish al Diglo, all the Shvatim, all the tribes. And we have, everybody knows his own place. Everybody sits around the Mishkan. Everybody knows when a battle starts, what he does, what he doesn't do, where he stands, etc. And therefore, we can understand at the beginning of the Sefer that some people are exempt. Some people are thrown out of the Machaneh. If you have some Nazir, somebody that is very extremist, let's say we spoke last week about Pinchas. If you have Pinchas style, Nazir or Shimshon or somebody like this, that is very weird, a person that doesn't go in between like everybody, that wants to be extremist, okay? So we, in the global meaning, we don't want him to be in the Machaneh. Therefore, the Torah explicitly in Parashat Naso, after organizing the Machane in Parashat Bamidbar, and Naso says, okay, you want to be different, we have a separate parasha for yourself, but know that you're different, that you're not a part of the global, because we have to know that you're muzar. Okay, the same thing happens with Soita in a different meaning, that she doesn't want to solve the things with her husband, between her and him, and she does something out of the מחוץ לתמונה, that not מקובל, unacceptable, and therefore we have a very, very strange process to deal with it. Yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses his own name, and we throw it, and we let HaKadosh Baruch Hu to decide whether she sinned or not. Something that usually we come to Beit Din. Here we don't come to any Beit Din. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Beit Din. Okay, and we have the Metzora, that is something משולח מחוץ למחנות, and basically we have all the things with the machane. And when we explained it in Parshat Be'alotcha, we said that that's the reason why we have the Chatzotzrot, because Am Yisrael marches into Eretz Yisrael, and he needs to know when the army starts, when the army stops, and how to gather together, and therefore they have trumpets. Okay, but at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, we see a very, very transfer towards the Yochid.
Yeah, that's a lot.
The Yochid, the singular person, the not the Machane. One thing is in front of me, וידבר משה אל ראשי המטות לבני ישראל לאמור, איש כי ידור נדר להשם, הוי שווה שבועה וסור יסר על נפשו, לא יחל דברו. We have the neder, which basically, whatever it means, when you are neder, there are societies that use nedorim more, there are societies that use nedorim less, but when do you use nedorim? If you want to be
different.
Yourself, okay? You don't feel that the Torah with a general mitzvot is enough for you, and therefore you use your own isurim, you use your own world. You say, let's say that I want to make a diet, so I say I don't eat gluten at all, okay, and I make a neder on it. So I make an isur, I take gluten, I take pita, I take bread, and say it's mamash asur to me like a chazir. Okay, and we have a Masechet Shlema, Masechet Nedorim, that deals with it, meaning to say that I, as an individual, makes my own Torah. And that's the reason why we don't like it so much. There is a machloket between the Noder is Tov or Lo Tov, the Nazir, which is a part of a Noder, whether it's good or Choteh. We have in Daf Yud Aleph, Nazir and the Nedarim, machloket, whether it's good or not, because we don't like a Torah of individuals. And therefore, in Erev Yom Kippur, before we start the only day of Klal Yisrael, the first thing that we do, and somehow even non-religious people come to listen to this tefillah, even though that it doesn't have any chashivas, any significance, because it's just a tefillah of Kol Nidre. But what does it say? It says that we're no longer individuals anymore today, in this day. We are all united. That's why the Satan cannot control on Yom Kippur. It doesn't have a shlita. HaSatan, the Gemara says that HaSatan is 364, and we have 365 days. The only day is Yom Kippur, because there we're united. Okay, so in order to be united, you have to negate your personal nedorim. Okay, so where does the neder appear? Just in Parashat Matot, and it's mamash in contradiction to all the things that you expected from Sefer Bamidbar, because it's not the machane. Okay, it's not something to the klal. Am Yisrael marches towards Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't need the personal nedorim, and even though it appears here. Afterwards, we have a very interesting parsha of Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven, okay, which is very, very, very individual. It's very interesting. They come to Moshe. I want to discuss it now, but they come to Moshe. ומקנה רב היה לבני גד ובני ראובן. The Torah starts by saying that they have a lot of flocks of sheep, and therefore they need more mikne. And they come to Moshe and they start saying, they don't even explain themselves. They start with what they need. עטרות ודיבון ויזר ונמרה וחשבון ודלה ושבע מונעו ובנות. And הארץ הזה ארץ מקנה ולעבדיך מקנה. So they just show in front of him, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cities full of trees, full of herbs, full of deshe, whatever. We need it. Look how much mikne we have. And Moshe, instead of understanding what they ask, starts yelling at them. It's very weird, the discussion between them and him, because if I were him, the only question I would discuss is whether they could sit in Ever Yarden or not. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to give you Eretz Israel. You want to sit in Ever Yarden. Is it permitted? You want to be an outsider. That's the only question that I would have. And Moshe, that's the only question that Moshe doesn't discuss. He doesn't ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't give any opinion whether it's good or not to sit in Ever Yarden as not Eretz Israel. The only thing that I understand that he is caring about is that's a prisha from the klal, that you are not individuals. You are a part of the group of Am Yisrael. How can you be outsiders? It's not a problem of sitting outside of Eretz Israel. You want to sit in Chutz La'aretz, okay, but just make sure that you are a part of the nation. And Moshe Rabbeinu is very bothered by sitting outside of Eretz Israel just because being a part outside of the nation, okay? And then they correct themselves up, and when they argue with Moshe, ping pong, everybody says, at the end of the day, they make an agreement. But what the whole parak says, there are two tribes. Pay attention that at the beginning it's just Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven. Bnei Menashe doesn't say anything, okay? And just at the end of the parak, Pitom Megi'im Lahem Bnei Menashe, okay? Vayiten Lahem Moshe, okay? Livnei Gad ולבני ראובן ולחצי שבט מנשה בן יוסף. So it's very weird. Where did they come from? That's another issue. I just mentioned it in a second in the name of Rav Meidan. Rav Meidan holds that Menashe, half the tribe, sat outside Eretz Israel and even wasn't in Egypt. He wasn't in Egypt. He bases it on Psukim B'divrei Hayamim that Machir ben Menashe got married with a daughter of Gilad. Okay, the Gilad was the governor of the region in Ever Yarden. He was Goy, apparently, and his daughter was married to Menashe. We know that Yosef married Osnat bat Potiphar. Before Matan Torah, they married non-Jewish girls, and being a Jew or being not a Jew was just to keep Derchei Hashem, so probably she kept Derchei Hashem. And according to Rav Meidan, half Shevet Menashe sat in Ever Yarden, didn't go to Mitzrayim, and therefore they sat there, and therefore they didn't have to ask Moshe, because they sat there, and Am Yisrael, when they came, they just met. The half Shevet Menashe that kept everything from 400 or 500 years ago, and therefore they just it's their fault. They just came with Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven at the end. The Gemara uses the word Tnai Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven. We don't say Chatzi Shevet Menashe because at the beginning it was just Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven. Anyway, it was just as a derech hagav. But anyway, coming to Bnei Gad Ubnei Reuven, they have again being divided from the nation. That's what Moshe is worried about. Afterwards, we have the problem with the Bnot Tzlofchad. not Zlofchad wanted as daughters to be given a nachala. Moshe gave them in the last Parsha of Pinchas, but there was a problem because Shevet Menashe is very worried what would happen if they get married out to non-tribal Menashe people. They'll get married with Reuven, ואז הנחלה שלהם will belong to Reuven, and will lose from our tribal נחלה. So again, why do you care? It stays in Am Yisrael. We see again that we have a lot of individual as it makes Nedorim, individual that a tribe that cares for himself, like Negad Bnei Reuven, and the tribe that cares to himself, even on behalf of the others tribes, like Shevet Menashe, that comes and saying what would happen if they marry out from different Shvatim. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to tell them that nowadays don't get married with other Shvatim. And as I mentioned once, one of you remember that Yiftach HaGiladi in Perek Yud Aleph of Shoftim, he was Ben Isha Zona. So basically, we understand that his mother was immoral. That's a common interpretation. But Radak and other Meforshim said, no, what was called Zona in that days, if you got married with a Jewish person not from your tribe, then you are considered a Zona, because then the tribe, the Nechala, can leave the tribal. So we see how the individual is very choshuv at the end of the Sefer. And in order to explain it, once I explained that there is a mistake, because when you organize a machane, when you organize a klal, you never can neglect the individuals and just say you're just the numbers, and then you're just a part of the klal. That's a big mistake. At the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, we have a Ramban that explains that even all the tribes that they have the numbers and they have the families and they are very well organized. He explains that when every individual of the tribe goes in front of Moshe and Moshe sees him for a second, then Moshe gives him a look, and that gives him the entity of him as an individual. Like, the big line that was in front of Rabbi Milobavitch. He gave you a second, he gave you $1, he gave you 2 seconds to speak one sentence, but people could feel, even today, like 20, 30, 40 years after, they understand and they feel the very moment sitting in front of Rabbi Milobavitch, how he looks at them, and even in a look of 2 seconds, he really gave them the whole entity, understood them, he gave them with a sentence an advice for life, etc. So the same thing says the Ramban on the Shvatim. It's very important when you make a machane, not just to make numbers, not just to make an army based on 600,000 people, because then the individual loses his own entity, and he doesn't know what to do with it, and therefore he gets lost. And just speaking about nationality, leumanut, Eretz Israel, global interest of the nation is not enough. You have to give each individual in his own identity. Therefore, Sefer Bamidbar as a whole is not enough by its beginning just to organize a machane, to organize the nation and expand everybody that is extremist or doesn't go in between, but you have to give each and every individual his identity. Therefore, if he wants to make a Nedorim, you care for him. If he has a problem with his Nachala, he wants to sit in Ever Yarden, okay, so you discuss with him. If he wants if he has a problem that intermarriage between tribes can lose his nachala, it's a problem because you cannot tell him you don't care. It's just a problem of the nation. The nation, everything stays in the nation. It's not an answer. Everybody has to get his own identity. That's one issue. But now, based on the Maharal, I want to add more. We have a transformation of the book of the 4 books of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his attitude to give the Torah from his side, Kehilu, and to the 5th book of Moshe, of representing Am Israel, the receiver, the Mekabel, how he perceives the Torah from his side. Something has to be human more, something has to be rational more, less chukim, more mishpatim. We have to understand it from our side. And I would expect at the dooms, at the dimdumim of the 4 books, at the very end of the 4 books, that it will have some influence from the 5th book. And that's why we have at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, it's not just the end of Sefer Bamidbar, it's the end of the Torah, it's the end of the 4 former books. We have a movement from the discussion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Klal and the nations that he formulates on earth, Am Israel, and from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, Ke'ilu, it's just Meshanet that you have a nation and you have a Mesudar and you have a Legiono Shel Melech that everybody sits in a certain place and knows exactly, and it's for the other nations it symbolizes HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, and he has a nation that is the army of the king. But from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, Be'emet, the individual doesn't count. We know that in the philosophy of medievals, there are a lot of shitot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't count, but for the sex. It doesn't count for the individual. Let's say that you kill when you're going to להתפלל, you kill 1,000 of ants. According to Rambam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't count, doesn't know, doesn't care, doesn't mashgiach on each and every ant. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just cares that you won't kill the whole ants at the road. Okay? Human being is different according to the Rambam, but the same explanation can be even, not even a human being, but on Am Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, he has יצב גבולות עמים למספר בני ישראל. So when he created the world, he created nations, and he created his nation, which is Am Yisrael. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares. If you're an individual, if you have your own problem, I don't want to say that Chas v'Shalom HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care, because that's the whole Tefillot of Yomim Noraim is all about caring. But from the former 4 books of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it doesn't care so much. That's why we have just at the Dimdumim, at the end, towards Sefer Dvarim, just at the very end, the very suburbs of Sefer Bamidbar, we have all the issues that the Yochid cares for, like Dorim, like a tribe that cares for himself, like a tribe that doesn't want other tribes to marry with him, because if as the girls will lose the Nachala, and so on. And therefore we find it at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. And I think that in Sefer Dvarim is all the things of the Yochid is very natural. We'll come to Sefer Dvarim, and then we'll come to the language of Sefer Dvarim. Ki tomar bilvavcha rabim hagoyim haele eicha ucha leorisham. So we don't feel, but we have mamash a transformation from. We don't have ki tomar bilvavcha in the former 4 books. I don't care what you tomar bilvavcha. You have what Am Yisrael says. Okay, everything is in plural. We talk to the nation, we talk to the commons, but Sefer Dvarim deals with the problems of a Yochid, the questions of a Yochid, the dilemmas of the Yochid. Tomar Bilvavcha, would you want to join? Wouldn't you want to join? And so on. And it has, as I said, an influence on at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. Therefore, we have so many things and so many issues dealing with the Yochid. And it's just a part. Last week I spoke about Pinchas that starts at the end of Balak and Noach that starts at the end of Bereshit. So maybe here we have a little bit like a tale, is a nav of Sefer Dvarim in Sefer Bamidbar, in the 4 Sforim from Bereshit to Bamidbar, dealing with the Yochid, which כאילו belongs to Sefer Dvarim. להתראות.
יישר כוח. וואו, beautiful. תודה רבה.
תודה לכם. הרבה בריאות, נינה, בעזרת השם. להתראות.